dedications. One should be Nishmas Daniel ben Esther. He was a Talmud who passed away, unfortunately. His it was yesterday. Also in honor of Mr. Baruch Russell and family of Chicago, we're kind of sponsoring this year. And for the Atzlacha of all of Am Yisrael, especially as war is breaking out a little bit, this should be good for all those fighting, and all those in captivity should go free. And to this week's Parsha, Parshas VaYakhel. So, when we deal with the Mishkan, everything's a mystery. Every item, every detail in the Mishkan obviously has secrets upon secrets. Each thing is extremely powerful. And as is mentioned, the Mishkan, this original one we have that we read about here, was Nignas. It was hidden. It's still there, the Sfas Emes says. It still has its power and influences. So we're going to take a look at a piece of Tiferes Shlomo. Tiferes Shlomo is Rabbi Shlomo of Radomsk. Radomsk was a Hasidus in Poland. The reason I'm mentioning it is because sometimes there are Hasidic groups that don't exist in a big way today, and we don't realize how big they were beforehand. Radomsk was a kingdom of Torah, meaning they were very famous for a network of yeshivas that they started that was growing and expanding throughout Poland called Keser Torah. They had a Torah journal. Part of this was enabled by the fact that I think the second Rebbe was also very successful in business, to the extent that he didn't really run the businesses himself. He knew it was done, but he provided jobs for people from his kehillah running the business. And then the money, I forget exactly what it was, something having to do with the railroads or something. And that enabled them to create this whole network of yeshivas called Keser Torah. There's a Torah journal that called Keser Torah that they produced that's still quoted from often. Okay, so we're going to look at the Keruvim. Okay, the Keruvim are a very mysterious aspect. These cherubs, right, that they call. That's basically a phonetic way of saying Keruvim. They're on top of the Aron HaKodesh. I'll just mention they're giving as a Mari Mokum for a site. In the Sefer HaKuzari, in the argument between, or the dialogue between the king of the Khazars and the Jewish Chacham who's supposed to be there. So after the Jewish Chacham describes the Jewish people's special relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how it's based not on one person wandering out from the desert and saying, God spoke to me, but they had these experiences together nationally. So he says, okay, but they really messed up with the Chet HaEgel. So didn't that destroy everything? So there the Kuzari does an interesting kind of defense. He says, first of all, you see only a small amount of people relatively were killed as punishment for that. Number two, he says, why do you say that they did idolatry? He says, they made an image, it's true, but guess what? The Mishkan was full of images. Okay, especially probably most notable of the Keruvim. They're right smack on top of the Aron HaKodesh. The only difference was those were ones that Hashem commanded, and the Egel they made wasn't one that Hashem commanded. Okay, so that was a certain distinction that he made. Now the Keruvim have an interesting description. They're described as Porsei Knofaim Lamala. Their wings are spread up. Sochachim bekanfehem ala kaparis. They cover over, like schach in your sukkah. Sochachim with their wings on the kaparis, which was the covering of the Aron HaKodesh. Upaneim ishel ochiv, and their faces were one to their brother. Good evening, Barry. So this is the description. This is the position of these Keruvim. So if the Torah gives us those details, what is it telling us? What are we supposed to learn from it? So he says the idea of raising wings is like the idea of raising hands. There's an expression in Yeshaya, uparischem kapechem, when you raise your hands in tefillah. It's interesting. I saw one sefer describing why that mode of body language in tefillah we don't do anymore. This idea of tefillah with outstretched hands. But you find it mentioned a few times. So the Keruvim, he said, with the idea of their wings being stretched out, represents a mode of tefillah. Okay, the idea of tefillah, and we're going to see in a second also Torah, because remember they're on top of the Aron HaKodesh. So he says, why is this? He says, because in the Inyan HaTefillah, when it comes to tefillah, when a person davens for his friend, to awaken rachamim for his friend, he says, then that tefillah has a power to awaken the desire above and the chesed from above to come into the world. If a person is davening and only thinking about himself and his own good, he says, it's rachok kamod means like it's a long shot. This tefillah is going to be accepted above, right, the ratzon. He says this is what he wrote about when Moshe Rabbeinu was introduced, where it says, Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grew up, so to speak, and it mentions twice the idea of Moshe becoming big. Harishon Lakoma, Rashi says, the first one is actually Moshe Rabbeinu grew up. We met him as a baby not long ago, and suddenly he's there and grown up. Hashniya L'Gedula, but the other was for greatness when he went out to Am Yisrael, and Nosan Enu Velibo, he applied his eyes and his heart, right, to feel their pain and to see what's happening with them. So he says, this is what we're learning. Pneim Ishel Ochiv. The Keruvim, they're in a mode of tefillah, but each one is looking at the other. That's a very important message for us. It says, giving something that's a key for tefillah. If tefillah is totally self-centered, so then there's something wrong with that tefillah. He explains this also, what we say in the Kedusha and Musaf. Mesharsav shoelim zeh lazeh ayim makom kavodo. And then, he says, Mesharsov, who are these Mesharsov, these servants of Hashem? Right? We usually assume it's Malachim. He says, these are tzaddikim amitim, these are true tzaddikim, ovdei Hashem be'emes, who truly serve Hashem, shelo manas l'kabel pras, not to receive a reward, lo b'olam hazeh, v'lo b'olam haba. Meaning, they're not even paying attention to the idea of reward in olam haba. They're just paying attention to the fact of what Hashem wants in the world. And what Am Yisrael needs, he says there, because even he says a tzaddik who is working for his own status in Olam Haba, Odenu Ovedas Atzmo. He's in certain ways working for himself. Okay, we learned this previously in Hashem Mishmul about Yehuda, the idea of Yehuda going out and not spending time just to be metaken himself. Okay, so therefore this idea of Mesharsov Shoalim Zelazeh is that they're each looking, asking for the others Tova for all these things that would be there. Now, in Parshas Yisro, he speaks about this idea as well. And there he speaks about the Pasuk in Shir Hashim, Hashmi'ini es kolech, ki kolech orev umarich noveh. Right? It's in Shir Hashim, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your appearance is pleasant. So he says the idea of kolech orev is like what Yehuda told Yosef, ki avdecha orav es hana'ar. He said, when Binyamin came, and now Yosef wants to take Binyamin because they found the cup in his bag, Yehuda says, listen, I was an orev for the na'ar. Orev is like people bump into it when they rent apartments here. You need a cosigner, right? Or you take out a loan, you need a cosigner. That means I am taking responsibility for this loan. Yehuda is saying, I took responsibility for Binyamin. I told my father that if he doesn't come back, right, it'll be on me. It'll be my fault. So he says that that's a lashon both of sweetness and the idea of taking responsibility. Hashmini is called, let me hear your voice in tefillah, ki kolech orev, because you care about what happens to Am Yisrael. So it's not just, he said, even feeling their pain, but also to be happy with the Yeshua of everyone. Is a pasuk v'simchas olam al rosham, right? The simcha of the world will be on their head. Okay, this is this pasuk. It's from the Keruvim, right? V'simchas olam al rosham, meaning in the future, that the rejoicing that the tzaddikim will be for the simcha of the entire world, not just for themselves. He says the ikar simcha won't be on the fact that he's been redeemed, but the world will be redeemed. And this also in Yisro there he explains, why is it the Torah writes Yisro's praise? Baruch Hashem asher yitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim miyad Paro. The Yisro came and said, wow, you were saved from Mitzrayim. He said many Jews must have praised Hashem when they got out of Mitzrayim, right? Many of them must have done that. He says, but the difference is that Yisro wasn't there. He wasn't part of it. When someone can praise for the good that another person's having, that's a tremendous power of Shevach. So he says it goes in both places. In Tefillah, the idea of davening for someone else's need and caring about someone else's need. In praising Hashem, there's a great power to praise when someone else is benefiting, even if you're not benefiting from it. Okay, so that is a tremendous power which is there. So too, right, in the future, right, it says, one second, Hodul Hashem kitov ki la'olam chasto. Okay, this is what David HaMelech says in Tehillim. I'm praising Hashem, ki la'olam chasto. Usually explain la'olam means like forever. He's saying no, for his chesed, for the entire world. He said, when you have something good that happens to you, don't just thank Hashem for that. Step back and take a look at the chesed that Hashem has done in the world throughout the year. Okay, that there's always chesed going on in countless ways. Doesn't mean that there aren't painful things and problems happening as well. But when you appreciate your chesed, because you do, even if there are problems going on, when something happens good to you, you feel thankful. So therefore, have thanks for all of the world. Okay, he says, therefore, if a person thanks just for himself, he says, first of all, he says that's grius hanefesh. He said that's something negative in you yourself, that you're so self-centered that you thank Hashem only when something happens to you. And he says you're not able to be sameach for Am Yisrael. He says it's also something lacking in the Hodah itself. In other words, if someone is doing so many things and I just thank him for that one little aspect which is there, right? So then that which applied to me, that's not really thanking the person properly. So all of this brings us to a confusing chazal in Bava Kama about the idea of davening for other people. Okay, and it got very popular recently, and there are songs about it and different things. It says in Bava Kama, "Hamispalel al chavero, v'hu tzarich la'oso davar, hu nenet chila." Right? If a person davens for his friend, and he himself needs the same thing, he's going to be answered first. Okay, this is the way it's usually explained by people, that it's this kind of segula, let's call it, right? That I'm going to daven for someone else. Let's say I don't have a job. So I look around shul, oh, he doesn't have a job. It says if I daven for him to get a job, not only am I going to get a job, I'm going to get a job first. And that's this whole thing, daven for me, daven for you. Like, I need a job. Is there anybody in the shul without a job? What can I do? I need to find somebody unemployed to daven for so that I can get a job, right? And it seems very self-centered. It also seems like some kind of competition, right? The two young women are speaking. One says, I'm going to get married before you. She said, why? Because I've been davening for you to get married. Says, tough luck. I started 2 years ago davening for you. I'm going to get married first, right? It doesn't seem to make sense so much. So Rabbi Yitzchak Gevorky explained it this way. He said, "Hamaspalel al chavero," someone who's davening for his friend, v'hu tzarich la'oso davar, and he needs that same thing. It doesn't mean he needs it for himself. He has a job, but he feels that the need of that person to get a job is my need. I need him to get a job. It's not that he needs a job. I need that. Then, for the benefit of that person, his tefillah will come in first because it's so pure. Okay, that is tefillah as it's supposed to be. So when you feel that for the person, when you can see when it's there, when it's not just tied into yourself, it's a tremendous milah. When a person feels it again, it's very hard. People point out Rabbi Levin Zatzal that he once kind of shocked the doctor. He went with his wife, and the doctor asked what's wrong. So he said, my wife's leg hurts us. Right? This idea that he felt, the pain in her leg was his. I mean, there's a very powerful statement that was said. There's a famous composer of Nigunim, Reb Hillel Paleh. He composed so many Nigunim that we sing on Yom Neroim and other times. And I can't remember if it was his daughter or his daughter-in-law. There was a tragedy a couple years ago, just near the Rav Shefa Mall. A bus driver was trying to fix something with his bus, and suddenly the brakes went off and it rolled backwards. And this young woman, very newly married, lost both of her legs. And so I think I forget if it was his son or his son-in-law, was speaking about it at some place. And he said that, while his wife was in the hospital, she asked him, she says, what if you were now looking for a shidduch and somebody said, I know this really nice young woman, she doesn't have legs. She lost her legs. Would you have been interested in looking into it? And he said, probably not. She said, so what now? He says, now it's us. It's our problem. It's our legs. It's entirely different. Right? That's, they say, there, you'd be looking, I feel bad that she has that problem. We have this now, right? We're people of 4 legs, and we now have only 2, and that's the way of looking at it. So it's a high madrega to reach, and sometimes it's true. You can't reach it with everybody all the time, but with people around, if you build it and develop it, it's the same way Rabbeinu Yonah explains. Why did he say in Pirkei Avos, Knei lecha chaver, acquire for yourself a friend. One friend? Why not say chaverim, get friends? He says, because to be a real friend is a hard thing. First, do it with one person. Then you can do more, right? But first, acquire a friend as it is. Now, the Tiferes Shlomo here, he takes it even a step further. He says, Hamispalal al chavero, v'hu tzorich le'oso dover, means like this. Let's say I'm a wheat merchant, and out there this year, it's a drought. And the price of wheat is going to shoot up. As long as that drought keeps going, there's not going to be a crop this year. The wheat that I have in my warehouses is going to be worth, 10 times what it would be. He says, so really, that chesed that's going to come, I need, I need the state without the chesed. I need the drought. But people need water. Hamispal al chavero, someone who davens for his friend, he needs that which is causing problems for his friends. Nonetheless, he davens for that to be solved. So hunenet chila. There he's answered first. And Rebbe Elimelech of Lijan says that this is just a beautiful picture of Am Yisrael. Right? Rebbe Elimelech's Yortzeit is coming up, I think Friday. He says that Chazal say, Ein achavush matir atzmo mibeis ha'asurim. A prisoner can't get himself out of prison. It's hard for a person himself to get himself out of a situation. But someone else can. So he says, so Am Yisrael, if they're all davening for each other all the time, right? So then we're getting each other out of prison. Each one is looking and doing that, etc. Maybe it's like the famous mashal, if you call it like that. They say someone gets to look at Gan Eden and look at Gehinnom. Right, and he goes and he sees the what is it?
They're both the same except for one thing.
Right, it's with the spoon or the arm.
Each place there's no elbow.
Right, you can't bend your arm.
Which means you can't feed yourself.
Right, but in Gan Eden, each person can feed each other. In Gehinnom, they're just sitting there starving away because nobody's thinking to feed the other one. Okay, so he says that's supposed to be the picture. So that's what these Keruvim represent. These Keruvim represent the idea of tefillah and pneim ishel ochiv. But looking at the other person and looking for what the other person needs. Okay, he says, Sholim b'tachanunim u'b'tefillah liros tovas chavero. That it's supposed to be that we can actually daven to want to see the good of a friend and also, as he says, to rejoice in that which your friend rejoices. That's really one of the definitions of what's called ayin tova, the good eye, is your friend wins the lottery and you're delighted. Okay, you still have problems with the bank and they're calling you every couple days because of your things, and here he won $10 million and you're delighted. Okay, that you can see. I saw such a story about Gudel Eisner. I've quoted before this special Ger Chassid who was in the camps for like 4 years, and at one point they were getting moved from one place to another, and as they were about to get moved, there was some German officer, for whatever reason, who told him, he said, it's better to stay here, right? And he had reason to believe that he was actually telling him the truth, but he said, no, I want to go with my friends. So he went with his friends, who were getting moved to this next place, which was another concentration camp. And a while after they got there, they heard that the Russians came and liberated the first place where they were in. If he would have stayed, he would have been liberated. When he heard the news, he started laughing. And so he said, what are you laughing for? He said, because my friend Zalman, who's back there, I bet he gets to have so much bread he can even make 2 slices out of it. You just took a decision which meant you're heading into more Gehinnom. Most of us would torture ourselves. Why did I decide this? Why did I not decide that? He was looking at the good of the people who were lucky enough to get out then and to enjoy it, right? To be able to do that. That's supposed to be the picture of who we are and how we are. Okay, so now he says this is not just for tefillah, but it's also for Torah. Again, just another example, a pasuk of David HaMelech. Nasata simcha belibi, David HaMelech says, you put joy in my heart. Me'ez deganom v'sirosham rabu. When I saw the grain and the tirosh, right, the grape harvest, the wine, be great and successful for other people. Okay, this idea, also, there's a pasuk that describes tzaddikim, he points out, it says, Rak l'shetef ma'im rabim, elov lo yagiu. Okay, he says, even for the flow of many waters, which don't reach him. It starts, Al zosis palel kol chosid elecha los mitzvah. For this, a chosid, a true righteous person, davens to you. He says, even though shetef ma'im rabim, this flow of water represents chesed. The chesed is not going to get to him. Okay, that's not going to be affecting him. But he's delighted, right, to be able to see this for the others. So now he fits it in here, but it's a very big principle to see. He says, this is v'zeh shaykh b'chol inyonim, ki gam b'torah u'tfilah tzarich lios magamas chefetza lios b'malas chavero. Not just in tefillah, but also Torah. Okay, that the Torah that you're learning has power, and it's supposed to be to benefit everyone. Right? That's not just what we say, halomed almanas lamed, right? The one who learns in order to teach, right, is able to spread Torah, etc. But just the very fact that I'm learning brings benefit to the world. I don't want it to be just for me. I want it to be for everyone. Okay, that a person should be able to do that, and you should be able to see Mailas Chavero, right? You want to see other people doing, other people succeeding, which is a difficult thing sometimes. There's a beautiful parish that Bartanur brings down on the tefillah of Rav Nechunya ben Akona for saying when he would go into the Beis Medrash, and he would say, V'al ekoshel bidvar halacha, save me from making a mistake in matters of halacha, right? And my friends will be happy with me. So most people read it as two separate requests. One, I don't want to make mistakes in halacha when I'm learning or teaching. Second, I would like my colleagues to be happy with me. The Bartanur says, no, Rebbeinu Shalom, I'm asking, please save me from making mistakes. Why? Because I'm afraid that if I make a mistake, the other people in the Beis Medrash will be happy that I made a mistake. And that could be very bad for them. Right? So he says, therefore, I want to be sure. He wasn't looking at it, just save me from making mistakes, because then I lose points. Save me from making mistakes, because someone else may then fall to the temptation of, so to speak, enjoying the fact that I made a mistake, and then they're going to suffer from that. So this is the idea of constantly looking at Tovas Chavero. And he says this is really the whole aspect of the Mishkan, which we describe in these Parshas. I spoke in the beginning of Shmos, right, that it gets very difficult when you get to the Parshas of the Mishkan. Nothing else gets more ink. And the Ramban said in the beginning that the whole story of Sefer Shmos, they won't be considered redeemed until the Shekhinah returns to dwell among them like it dwelled among the Avos. That's what's happening in these Parshas. And it goes through the materials and it describes how they're put together. And then in the end of Pekudei, next week's Parsha, tells us that the Shekhinah did indeed dwell among them. So why do they have to give us the details of how they assembled it? Okay, we saw the parts. We know this one has hooks and this one has loops. And we know that the hooks are going to go into the loops. But he said this whole idea of VaYachaber Hayerios Achas El Echos Bakrosim Vaya Mishkan Echad, that they would take these loops and these hooks and they join them together, and that made the Mishkan one. Okay, he says because this very action is supposed to represent what Am Yisrael are doing. Al Yedei Sarusa Dilatato, by the awakening from below. In Kol Echad Ve'echad Mibnei Yisrael, he says, if we, Ba'achdus in Kol Echad Ve'echad Mibnei Yisrael, if we join together with every person of Am Yisrael, then we awaken this idea above, this Yichud, which is V'haya Mishkan Echad, meaning then Hashem can dwell among us, because then we'll actually be one. Okay, so this idea with all the mystery of the Keruvim and what they are, he provides us here, he says, it gives us a very big action item. That is supposed to be the image that Am Yisrael have of Torah and Tefillah, right? That it's an idea of Ish El Achiv, of one looking at the other. But Perischem Kapechem, raising the wings, is a lotion of Tefillah, but also it says an idea of Schocha, of protection, right? To protect others, to put out an idea of protection. It's not just asking for myself, not just about myself. The simplest example of it is that the Shemona Esrei is in plural. Rafa'enu, help us. Ra'enu va'anyenu, right? It's all educating us toward that. It's a big battle because we tend to, center on ourselves very much, and we feel our pain very much. We feel our joy very much. And sometimes, again, the only time we can daven with intensity is when we really need something. That's when it really kicks in. But he says, take that opportunity if you really need something, and now your heart is open and awakened and you're really davening, so now daven for others as well, right? To be able to sense that and feel that. And then hopefully we'll be zocher to the Shekhinah returning again, b'mheira.